be sure that we can publish it. So again, thanks very much for coming. And as always, a little disclaimer, we are recording the call for the sake of the rest of the community to be able to access. It's always a great idea if you can share your video. That seeing your face is definitely a plus. So thanks for that. Okay, I think Stina, we should start.
Yeah. So I will first of all share also the board so that everyone can slowly open it. Our community board for the white paper. And let us know if you have any issues in accessing it. It should be open. Okay, but take your time. But so I will start to share my screen and voila. So today it's our fourth session. I think we have a lot of, I don't know if we have any new faces today, but we will see in the warm-up in just a moment.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little, so maybe I can present instead of you, and I can, maybe it's better. So let me just present instead.
That's probably, yeah, I usually have, otherwise I have to switch off my video, so.
Can you do that, Guglielmo? Do you have it handy?
I don't have it handy.
The presentation?
Okay, so I will do that on my side.
You might break up less with screen share than video. Video is more demanding.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. In any case, we will also soon go to Miro. So just a quick note on the agenda for today. If you can go to the next slide. To first of all start with a little warm-up exercise try to keep it to around 15 minutes, and then like last time Simone will give a presentation of our most recent research update, which will provide like the key topics for conversation in the collective intelligence working session. So you can take some notes and listen carefully to that. Then we will move into the facilitated conversations like we normally do on Miro, where this time we would love to have people volunteering to facilitate these breakouts, but we will also have one boundaryless team member in each room so that everyone is comfortable. And then in the last part, we want to give you an update on the big sense-making event that we are currently co-designing with some of you here. On the 23rd of July, that Gulli will lead. So we can ask for what you like and wish on these preliminary ideas. Yes. And before we close. So if everyone can move to Miro, we're going to kick off with the warm-up exercise. You will find the frame, the fourth community sense-making call, and you can click on either mine or Gulli's little ball to find us. So what I would like to invite everyone is to take a couple of minutes to think about how you would describe sense-making in a metaphor. So like if you hear the word sense-making, what comes to your mind? Like for me, it would be having conversations, for instance, but it can be anything that you feel could describe sense-making for you. Then you pick a color of the Post-it, and then you place it on a spectrum that is the line that you can see, thinking or feeling. So the idea is to understand who feels that sense-making is more a process of feeling, so body reactions and emotional reactions, or more an intellectual exercise. If you don't have any questions, I would give you like a couple of minutes to pick your color and write down your thoughts. and secondly, to place your post-its. So just let me know. Okay. I think if people are more or less ready, we can start to share a little bit. We are not that many, but I think if everyone shares, we might risk to run a little bit late in our agenda. So what I would do is to ask for maybe a couple of volunteers if they want to share. And usually when we do this kind of barometer, we can take maybe someone more on the spectrum of thinking. So someone who placed their post-it more in the thinking range. Do you want to share your post-it? For example, I can see decide with a purpose. It's on the furthest end.
Yeah. So I guess sense making is where you are about to face a set of decisions that could affect others or the people that you work with, or even in a service. Therefore, I think you need to take a step back and look at what's the purpose, what's the meaning that you're gonna communicate with that decisions, not just for the sake of a result of a mere goal.
Thank you. Do we have anyone new who didn't join our previous calls here today?
Yeah, I'm new.
Yes, me. Hi, Sarah.
Would you like to share? Hi and welcome.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I'm just working out.
Which one is yours, Sarah?
I placed mine somewhere right in the middle. And sorry, I'm just getting used to using Miro through the browser rather than actually through the Miro app. which
I'm sharing on the
wasn't.
screen, so you can also look at your screen and you will see the share. So you can just tell me where to go and I will focus on your
Yeah. Yeah, so I placed my post at just somewhere in the middle there between the thinking, which is really, you know, synthesizing a lot of the, you know, insights and research that you're doing to connect the dots. And then the feeling is sort of the making new meaning from it for me.
Which post-it is it? Can you see it there?
I'm this pink one where I've got my,
yeah, right.
Sarah Leslie.
Right. Thank you. Who else was I heard a new voice? Dan?
More into the feeling. I think I am the one more into the feeling space.
Is this yours?
Yes, that's mine.
Yeah, this is my first time along with Sarah. So it took me 4 times to get here, but this is number 4. But no, I'm familiar with your group through Ron Kursick at ING, and I'm based in London.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, all of this platform horizontal thinking is very important because silos are created in the vertical, right? So we've got to go left and right. My comment was around all the world's a stage. So, you know, we all interact with people, and I think actions come from thinking, but emotions, we're all at a heightened sense of emotion because of the last 3-4 months of COVID. And there's kind of a collective global consciousness where you feel less as an individual and more of a group all on the same boat to an uncertain future. But yeah, all the world's a stage and everything's connected, and digital makes it ever more so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think Simone, what did you put on the feeling scale?
Here in the feeling space, because I think there is this idea of participation that really lends toward doing something together. So essentially, it's really about feeling. You know, when you do something together, I think that this was the nuance that I wanted to promote and you know, share. Nice. So I think we will have a lot of opportunities to talk to each other later on. So I think we should move into the presentation with the habit of running late. So it would be lovely to hear from everyone, but we will hear the voices in the breakout sessions. So I leave you, Simone, to share again the presentation and talk us through the latest research updates. Okay, let me share. I hope you should be able to see that. Yes, okay. So you probably, so most of you have been reading the latest research update, and to some extent the latest research update for us was really a moment to try to wrap things together and see if there was some coherence coming up. And apparently we basically ended up in understanding that there were 3 main aspects coming up in the research, and one horizontal one that was more like, I would say, you know, in the middle. If you look into for example, in the compass, you will see that, you know, the evolution of organizational aspects are pretty much put in the middle, no? Because we believe that this is something that is related to the whole, not to the 3 topics. As you may have noticed, we have also introduced this concept of noosphere instead of just saying culture. This is to refer to an evolutionary process that essentially connects and circularly connects, let's say, biosphere, noosphere, and technosphere. So I would say that if we look into the theses that are emerging, we can certainly identify 3 vertical theses, which are number 1, 2, and 3, and 1 more horizontal. So let's look into each of them step by step. So the marketplace pervasiveness thesis is really about understanding that the dynamics of markets were pretty much always present, and the fact that we are living now today is our increased capability to essentially empower them through technology and optimize them with data. So I can reference, for example, to Rita McGrath words that she shared recently in a podcast. She said essentially that all the elements that we are seeing are making the traditional firm, less optimized to respond to the challenges, because essentially we see a lot of reduction in the transaction costs, and we see a lot of possibilities now to operate from a market perspective. And what we are seeing essentially is that the radical efficiency that the market-based firm offers are pretty much too, I would say, too important to just keep, remain stuck into organizing through in industrial, let's say, artifacts. So essentially, what we are seeing is this pervasiveness of the marketplace metaphor. And we pretty much believe that most of the rest of the markets that we still see not organized through the context and through the, let's say, patterns of marketplaces is going to be organized that way. Of course, it's also, we need to also acknowledge that there is a problem of regulation. There was a very interesting podcast that we had a few days ago with Stina. We were talking with Marshall Van Alstyne and Geoff Parker, the authors of Platform Revolution, and we really had a very intense chat around this idea of regulating these systems. And especially one point that they made up is that of course, the merge is that, of course, the antitrust approach that we are used to has lots of limitations in coping with this complexity and coping with these new patterns. So essentially, traditional regulation is broken. What we want to understand is what is the new emergent model of regulating these markets, and we were talking about this idea, for example, of self-regulation. So a regulation process, policy-making process that can be more adapted to complexity, let's say. So this is something that is coming up. And again, another very interesting point that was raised by Martin Reeves when we had this incredible interview that we also released as a podcast, and I also really encourage you to listen to. Martin Reeves is the chief, it's the director of the Boston Consulting Group Anderson Institute. And he really, the interview was amazing, but they really also made the point that these technologies that everybody's talking about really still didn't play out properly and didn't have the impact on the marketplace potential yet. So this is something we want to do for the white paper. We are in the process of doing, framing those technologies from the perspective of what impacts do they have on the value chain and on the organizational structure. So this is going to be part of the white paper that is coming up in the next few weeks. So coming to the second thesis, the idea of framing this systemic shift towards health. So essentially what we are seeing is as a consequence of growing systemic risks, we see a trend towards what many call localism, others call nationalism. I recall an interview that I also can suggest that you can look it up with Balaji Srinivasan, with I think Eric Weinstein. And it speaks about this polarization between what he calls rationalism and nationalism. So what we are seeing is that essentially the frictions that we are experiencing in terms of impacts of complexity to our supply chains and our institutions are pretty much pushing us to reduce the connectivity. For example, you can think about globalized supply chains, reduce this connectivity. And there is also another very interesting contribution that is coming up on the podcast. It's an interview we made with Nicolas Collin that explains very well how these trends are also pretty much operating at a geopolitical level. So now we see increasing fragmentation of markets, increasing, for example, polarization between the US and China and Europe in the middle. So this is the question. The question is, we are seeing to some extent pressure to reduce the connectivity of our systems. And also, I think we need to acknowledge the power shift that we are seeing in terms of coming back to the household and to the community. So I think the pandemic really drove this shift in value perception in many contexts. I'm using here the idea of transcontextually change in value perception, borrowing it from Nora Bateson. So the idea that our value perception is changing in many concepts, which could be our experience of our jobs, with the remote change, our contribution to our families, and so on. So I think this is really another very important thing that is really coming up. The third thesis is the one about the human development. And essentially what we are witnessing, according to the interviews that we are having and some analysis that we always share with you, is that the machine development thesis, so our algorithms, for example, have pretty much outgrew our capability to govern complexity. So to some extent, we are seeing a bureaucratic failure, which is for example, the one that we experienced with the pandemic. So essentially our bureaucratic institutions, industrial institutions had the plans. They had the idea that the pandemic was happening, but they completely failed to allocate the capital to, for example, edge our society from the risk of the pandemic. And this, to our understanding, is that essentially what we are witnessing is the lack of the proper reflective spaces to make sense of data, for example, to make sense collectively of the information, the crazy amount of information that our systems are generating. So Martin Reeds again made this remark in the podcast that I really suggest. He made this remark that essentially human ingenuity needs to regain a centrality and in our models of organizing. And that sense making is possibly the essential aspect of organizing that is emerging. As you know, we also titled I think one of the latest research updates really about transcending the information age into a sense making age. And the last point that I think it's the one that is much more horizontal is the point of how do we design then our organizations in this context. And essentially what we are seeing is that many organizations, especially the leaders, are embracing models of organizing that are much more keen to deal with uncertainty. So the leaders are essentially pushing lots of elasticity and lots of capability, if you will, to let parts of their organization to die fast and be born fast. Which is a trait that normally is not that common in traditional organizations, industrial organizations. Normally organizations really refuse to die, while what we are seeing is these pioneers are creating these networks of pieces which can be easily discarded and easily created. So there is this kind of embedded dynamicity and embedded flow in the organization of the future, if you want. And of course, we are also aware that in this process, and here I can also make a reflection on the idea of fragmentation that we are seeing, in terms of markets. So to some extent, it's true that marketplaces are becoming pervasive, but at the same time, they are also fragmenting. So this is posing quite a lot of challenges in our theories of growth, for example, of network effects. So how do we grow? How do we grow our organizations? We just recorded an interview that is coming on the podcast with Joe Bunch from Zappos. It's really a profound and amazing interview that we had. And we really talked about, for example, how do you grow the systems in your organization as you embrace these networks? So what does it mean, for example, to have an HR for a networked organization? What does it mean to have finance for a networked organization? And that's it. So the question of growth becomes comes back to our table. How do we grow our organizations organically? How do we grow our systems organically? How do we scale across instead of scaling up? So these are all theses that we need to understand, I think better. And of course, maybe the last point, and then I will leave the floor again to Stina. I think another point that is emerging pretty radically here is that we really don't understand the value anymore. And this value perception is shaping organizing. And what needs to be done is to address this new need to reframe value both at the institutional level. And for example, the work of Mariana Mazzucato comes to mind, and at the transcontextual level. So this is probably a reference to what I was saying before. So the idea that we are perceiving shifts in value, and we as organizers, we will react and design our organization on the basis of these new value perceptions that we are actually experiencing, not just theorizing at the institutional level. So that's more or less a wrap up of where we are at the moment. Stina, I don't know if you want to take the floor. I guess so.
Yeah. We just had a small community update that we wanted to share because we were very happy that Renzo took the initiative to propose like an interview for, in the last sense-making session, we presented this idea of having a B-sides channel on our YouTube, where we basically want to cover topics that are what we can think about as hidden diamonds that we have not included maybe in our main line of research, but that is extremely valuable in bringing contributions that are sort of a little bit outside the editorial line of the white paper. And in this interview, Renzo helped us to interview Jeff Emmett from Common Stacks. And we also have another interview on decentralized autonomous organizations on the YouTube channel with Luke Duncan from Aragon. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out. These are quite long interviews, quite spontaneous and semi-structured, but a lot of great content. So I just wanted to follow up on this before we move on to the sense-making session. And we have a survey that you can find on our Medium post that summarizes all the sense-making sessions. So if you want to provide inputs to us to help us improve this concept, it's very welcomed. So we can also share this in the link in the chat later on. Just as for the next one, maybe just as the common standing reminder that we have, that we are always we have our early adopters kits that we are constantly also evolving. And we will talk about this more later when we come back to the event, but we just keep this slide here to let you know that you can support us if you feel like that. Okay, so we're actually quite good in time, and now we want to create the breakout sessions based on the 4 topics that Simone was presenting. So you will find in the next slide, if you can move, what we thought about for this session. So here are the different topics that Simone presented. Starting actually with, so the sequence is a bit different, but bear with us. So this is how the groups are structured. So we have the topic on marketplace pervasiveness, so the future of markets. Group 2 on envisioning organizational evolution, so like the horizontal topic on organizations. And group 3 talking about framing the shift towards health, and group number 4 drawing the human development thesis. In the Miro board we have placed some instructions, but here you will see what we plan for this session. So the idea is that we move to the breakout rooms. Ideally we will find some volunteer facilitators in a moment, but then the idea is that we first spend a moment to think about how we see the trends linked to what Simone said, and probably with all the knowledge that you bring to the call today, to zoom in and think in the next 6 to 12 months, what is going to happen in this space? What do we see in this current moment of that we have also previously referred to, like it's the Kairos moment. And then in the next step, we want to zoom out and think about in 10 years from now, what could it be, where things are going. So this is a collective brainstorming exercise that that we will engage in, and then spend a moment to highlight some of the key trends and foresights, let's say, that you identify in your groups. So in terms of process, I would like to first of all ask if there's anyone who feels attracted to facilitate one of these group discussions around a certain topic, to please let us know. And you can just take the floor and say your name, and I will give you a minute to think about it while I'll also grab a pen.
Yeah, also let me add that what we are doing here, as you guys have been, you all have been, active, let's say, supporting this research from the very start. I think it's really good for us to share your points of view, to shape not just the conversation that we have here, but also the content that we are going to work on with regards to the event, for example, and with regards to the paper itself. And so really it's important for us to see how you also see these things happening, you know, so that's something that I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Sina, do we
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I see, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm okay to facilitate for the group of human development.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So good you broke the ice. So anyone else? It's not a hard must. It was to allow that we don't always take the lead. But we have backup, so don't worry.
That's good. It's 1:30 in the morning here, so I'm not keen to facilitate.
Wow. Wow, we are honored that you are here.
No.
That's fantastic. Wow. Okay. So on the second step, if not for the facilitation, then if you can please put in the chat which conversation you would like to join. That's probably an easier question. So, and then we will assign you to the groups, and you will find your space on the same Miro board. You just need to look for group 1, 2, 3, 4. The instructions are there, and there will be someone from the team. I mean, Renzo, as we know now, will facilitate the discussion in group 4. And for the rest, we will have Wanderlust team to help. So that will be the next half an hour or so, and then we will come back to share our key takeaways and in the plenary. So let's see how we do with the group. So Guli, I think you are kindly helping to do the breakout rooms. Am I right?
Yes, I'm adding people in the breakout rooms.
So just be patient and find your space.
Okay, I start to send you like in the breakout rooms, while the ones that are staying in the main room are the ones that still have to be assigned. See
Okay,
you there.
thank you.
Stina, I'm pausing recording, so let's remind you to start it again.
Okay, thank you.
I started again. Okay, Stina.
Okay, yes, we are even group number 1. We were with Rodrigo and Sarah, and then Camille joined us at the end. So we were talking about, can maybe if someone, I can ask someone to share.
I can share, yes.
Thank you.
Just a second.
But we had a very nice, interesting conversation. We ended up talking quite a lot about the industry of education, starting to talk about how, like, in the current moment, we see this unbundling, no? That people want to learn certain things, they want to engage in lifelong learning, and so this is unbundling. So people will be able to access to knowledge, so that the knowledge network that you have is as a service. So you can ask for legal advice on the spot, you can ask for many different things, and you can also learn many different things through this marketplace trend. So this is some highlights. But then in terms of thinking for the next 10 years, we thought this will be persisting. We will still have this landscape where you will be able to find most of what you need in different market spaces. And then we're thinking, but how will it be? Will it be some dominating player taking, aggregating and dominating the scene? But we have this feeling that, triggered by also the event like the pandemic, there will be a dual trend. So there will be giants that keep coexisting with smaller players. And so we talked about this, that what would happen is that some sectors or players like Amazon will stay and be providing this market domination to some extent, but communities will also get organized and build for redundancy. Then we went even further into the future and talked about, in 100 years from now, how universal education will not only be for humans on this planet, but might be universal education for the universe. So this was a futuristic trend that we talked about. Please chip in with anything, Rodrigo and Sarah, if you feel like highlighting.
I think you covered everything.
Cool. So next group, I guess it's Simone.
Okay. Well, just wanted to say that you're zooming out 100 years from now is not that ambitious, because I was talking examples yesterday, zooming out 1,000 years.
Oh, now you're
ambitious.
you were breaking up a bit.
Sorry. Could you hear me?
How many years?
We are ambitious.
1,000.
Okay.
Okay, so with regards to group 2, I think we had a crazy good conversation. It was really, really interesting. And we started to map what is happening now in the 6-12 months. And we see this trend of loosening control on one hand. On the other hand, the bureaucracy that wants to strike back and go back to normal. Then we spoke about the fact that essentially now traditional resources are drying up to some extent because of budget cuts and things like that. But on the other hand, private philanthropic foundations are pouring money in search for impact. And to some extent, this resonates with the fact that we are witnessing a lack of direction. So the idea that now lots of change needs to be done, but it needs to be done in uncertainty. So we don't really know what to do, but still we know that we need to change. So there is a kind of endemic lack of vision, lack of imagination, lack of leadership. And if an industrial age institution cannot give direction, it's really going into pretty much a crisis, so because it's their mission to give direction to some extent. We also see some simplification and paralysis, like focus on the essentials. We also see the Overton, what we called the Overton window of organizing, widening a little bit. So basically, since this accelerated digitalization, leaps in organizing feel more possible at the moment. Like organizations feel like a bit more ready to do leaps, not just incremental changes. And let me try to move this around. We also see, we also see the end of collocation. And this is also probably pushing towards more informality, more decentralization, more easy way to connect through layers in an organization. When we also look into the zoom out for the next 10 years, I think there is this still dynamic that we are seeing, which is this dynamic that on one hand you have more control possible, so more bureaucratic organization for part of the economy that are probably going to take care of secure part of the economy, let's say. On the other hand, there is a pressure to decentralize. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, we can make a recap saying that we see three possibilities. You know, one possibility is that bureaucracy strikes back and wins and exercise this strong control, essentially. There's another possibility that bureaucracy strikes back and decides to cooperate and subsidize decentralization. So to some extent, you have this dual layer of organizing, one which is more centralized and one which is more decentralized, and there is a lot of subsidiarity between the two. And then there is the possibility that bureaucracy simply fails to strike back and essentially continues to fail. And here, I think another interesting thing that came up is that we may need to deal with systems of relation that are more homogeneous to the organization, so more more self-run. So basically, self-organizing systems, you know, self-regulating systems. Sorry, not self-organizing. So, you know, in a perspective of failure of policymaking, what does it mean? Who exercise policymaking in these new decentralized systems, for example? So that's more or less everything. I don't know if you guys want to add something else. If not, we can move on to number 3.
For number 3, I will ask maybe to Kieran. You were taking great notes. If you want to share what came out.
Yeah, so thank you. Sorry, I'm just moving to my browser as well. Yeah, so the trends that we were looking at with regard to health, we were sort of having a discussion around, you know, that there's a lot of fragmentation happening, especially right now during COVID times, where things are kind of really shifting towards these kind of local communities that are reacting and trying to respond to changes. So we're seeing a lot of kind of fragmentation happening, and then perhaps that means there's a lot of duplication or replication of efforts happening in this short term. We're seeing these kind of shifts towards sort of hyper local communities, as mentioned. But what's emerging from this is kind of new communities of practice that are sharing what's being learned, what are the best practices, what are new tools and technologies, sharing knowledge around what's working, what's not working. And there's an interesting idea here about what are the kind of patterns and anti-patterns that we can see happening here. And then there's this kind of shift in dynamics and interaction happening between public and private sectors. For example, where the private sector is not able to respond, is facing a lot of challenges in order to be able to provide in sort of the supply chain or provision of services. So this means there are volunteering networks are springing up and responding to this and saying, hey, we can help and work together in ways that wouldn't have happened before. And so, you know, looking forward to extracting from here, right? So the antidote to the fragmentation and replication of efforts, the shifting of sharing insights that are happening at local levels to regional and national and international levels. This means that you need to be able to very quickly have a system that can replicate successful patterns while still allowing for flexibility and customization where it's needed. And then we were having a discussion around this sort of need for sort of dedicated microservices around sort of learning engines and transaction engines. And I think sort of going forward, it'd be really good to understand, you know, what do we call healthy in terms of growth in the new landscape? you know, where capitalism is very orientated around growth, but as we know, this has massive impacts on the environment, on and sustainability. So I guess a new definition of what healthy means is needed. When you've got learning and transaction engines that maybe are not in balance with each other, one can start consuming the other. Melanie, did I catch everything? Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think that was a great analysis. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kiran.
Thanks. Thank you. So last group, and then we come back to the...
Okay, with Marc-Antoine, I think we had a very nice flow conversation. We started from sharing our personal experience in terms of human development. And I think from the starting point was, okay, this development acquired, as we wrote, meaning the social context, and is related to an issue of coordination. So then we look at, okay, probably if we look at this problem in a short term, it might be useful to look at first address coordination, cooperation, and then enable collaboration. So also in the short term, it's like more and more lack of trust, probably in a global coordination. Therefore, there is this rise of local emergent organization. And another trend, I think we were looking at how from individuals to communities, we have this kind of relentless at the moment we want to do something, but I think we might need to slow down for perspective, trying to have a more spiritual thought process to then direct actions and impact from local level to global level. So moving on I think the next 10 years, we were discussing and articulating of the idea how then a global coordination could happen through network of bridges. That was a very good point from Marc-Antoine. And then the question was, okay, how can I be a network orchestrator in this context? So the cross-pollination as an emerging role and dynamics for the next 10 years. And I think we wrote quite a lot, so probably I would pick the idea of creating a training. We're looking at decentralization as well. So maybe we can see how organizations will shape themselves more towards autonomous self-governance. So how can then they reshape, they recreate dynamics on those elements, and therefore the training of skills could happen between skills versus trust in your network. So then the trust will come from a decentralized network, and that comes the idea of algorithm. So how this could then play out for trust in global networks. I think I will probably stop here, and then Marc-Antoine, please jump in if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, a few things. I mean, we were saying on the one hand, there's this kind of archipelago, you know, local connected coordination that's happening more and more. It will be fighting, I mean, there was a lot of overlap between the conversations, I noticed. It will be fighting with the bureaucracy, with the authoritarian, and the authoritarians also fighting back with information pollution and massive disinformation. And so I think a part of the training, of course, is, you know, all this working together in a decentralized way. And for this, we need decentralized credentials for our ability to work together in that way, as opposed to the skill training, which can be centralized as a MOOC. But also we need to learn how to discern trustworthy sources of information beyond tribal trust. What are the ways to discern lies? I think that is a key skill that we need to make. And we still have to do some global decision. Not everything can be coordinated in this loose way, because we have some global coordinated decisions to make, and how to do that. And some of it is, you know, algorithms are good for the market, but not so much for the human global coordination. So here we will need ways to have the global coordination. And that's, I think, will be an area of extreme innovation. I mean, somebody spoke about knowledge network as a service. I do think that's part of that solution. Did I forget something else, Renzo? Okay.
All good.
Thanks. Simone, if you want to offer some overall reflection.
I think first of all, one comment on the approach and the method. I think that this idea of sense making through zooming in and zooming out has been working pretty well in general for us at least. I don't know about you guys, but it's something that I will give another chance for sure. So this metaphor of zooming in and zooming out through sense making. Then I can highlight a few recurring elements, maybe if you don't mind. So the first that strikes me, it's this idea of living with lack of clarity. You know? So the fact that many of the pictures that we are picturing are also pictures of paradoxes and also pictures of coexistence of perspectives of subsidiarity and the friction between the centralized and the decentralized, for example. This pretty strong idea that we need to work out self-governance in complexity. So to some extent, creating governance systems that fit with complexity. So they are simple, scalable, and even multi-scalable. So for example, the idea of global versus local and so on. So another thing that came up, another two things that I noted down is this idea of collective organizing practices, sharing versus traditional education. So it appears that as the context where normally the traditional model of education would prepare you to play within disappears, then we need to figure out what do we do with education. So what kind of education do you need in this kind of post-institutional and complex context. Then the last point, the new theory of growth. So it looks like growth as we know it, like is losing ground. So like it doesn't really make sense anymore to think about scale and to think about centralization, at least to think about them as we used to think. So to some extent, I think we need not just a new understanding of value, as we said in the start, but also a new understanding of growth that we kind of seem to believe it's useful from a certain point of view, but it may be something that we don't understand yet in the new context, in this new decentralized and this new, different, to some extent, differently contained context of organizing. So these are the notes that I took. I don't know if somebody else wants to add some common trend or common considerations.
Share the screen.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we have approached the end of the session. We actually managed to cover the agenda this time. So that's nice. Thank you everyone for joining. And we know that some participants couldn't join. We are keeping this time slot because it's always difficult to balance across all the time zones. But we've also find that this is a moment that people are a bit relaxed on Friday afternoon in Europe, and we want to probably keep it. Now the big sense-making event will be, as you know, starting at 12 and running later. But we have this challenge of being very international. So for the next one, we are planning to have one more session like this before the 23rd of July. And we are planning it on the 3rd of July. And originally the idea was that we would keep it to this slot. And I don't know if we want to maybe discuss in the team if we want to alternate to try to see if we can accommodate also for people that Sarah was staying up now, I guess, until 3 in the morning. So let's see. But mark your calendars for the 3rd of July, and we will communicate the time if it changes. That's it from my side. I don't know if
maybe give a thanks to Rodrigo who made the preview of the website.
Yeah,
Thanks,
definitely.
Rodrigo.
People who didn't know that we have our design wizard.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Exactly.
Really. Oh, sorry, Rodrigo. I was trying to keep the time, to keep staying in the time slot. So that's why I was rushing to say thanks, everybody. And that's it. Again, really thanks everybody for the contribution as always, for the feedbacks and for the journey. I wish you a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.